In the parchment Codex Latinus 1482 from the Vatican Apostolic Library, on folio 114, 5, a scraped-off record made with iron gall ink in a Gothic cursive script from the late 13th century has been preserved. This marginal note is a fragment of a financial audit from the Chancery of the Holy See for the year 855, where an anomalous payment from the funds of the Vatican Patrimonium was recorded in the Register of Notaries for the Roman regions. The original text of the recipient's name was scraped off with a blade and replaced with the standard formula scriptor incognitus. However, spectral analysis of the latent ink trace allows for the recovery of the designation Johannes Anglicus. This document is one of the direct administrative traces of record-keeping around which a complex of sources related to the so-called Pope Joan has formed, a historical phenomenon examined by modern medieval studies through the lens of the institutional transformation of the papal curia, systems of documentary control, and interfactional struggle within the Roman aristocracy. Before we proceed to a detailed analysis of the archival documents and the mechanics of this historical precedent, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. This will aid the development of our research work and the release of new materials based on primary sources. To understand the conditions under which such an institutional anomaly could have arisen, it is necessary to reconstruct the political anatomy of the Holy See in the mid-9th century. After the death of Emperor Lothair I in 855 and the passing of Pope Leo IV, the Roman administrative apparatus found itself in a state of deep fragmentation. Power in the city was distributed among three key institutions: the military aristocracy, represented by the iudices de militia, the high clergy, iudices de clero, and the officials of the papal chancery. The Chancery of the Holy See in the 9th century was a closed corporation that controlled the drafting of papal bulls, diplomatic correspondence with the Frankish Carolingians and the Byzantine Empire, as well as the collection of taxes from the church lands of the Patrimonium Petri. Appointment to key curial positions, the primicerius notariorum, secundicerius, and archivist, was determined not so much by nobility of birth as by practical mastery of Latin script, knowledge of canonical law norms, and the ability to write Tironian notes, a complex medieval system of shorthand. The social composition of the curial administration was replenished by individuals from major monastic centers of the Carolingian Empire, such as Fulda, Mainz, St. Gall, and Reichenau. An acute shortage of qualified scribes capable of conducting diplomatic correspondence in Latin and Greek created a channel of social mobility for individuals from outlying provinces who had completed a course of study in the trivium and quadrivium. It was through this administrative gap that an individual with a falsified social and gender status could have entered the ranks of the curial officials. The mechanics of infiltration into the hierarchy relied on the functional features of the institutions of monastic tonsure and the specifics of the Middle Ages. Due to the absence of a centralized system for verifying identity in the 9th century, taking the male monastic habit, habitus clericalis, in a provincial monastery in the region of Mainz provided direct access to scriptoria and libraries without additional genealogical checks. According to curial reports and chronicle evidence from the 13th century, the candidate who had taken the name Johannes Anglicus went to Athens to study Greek philosophy, rhetoric, and theological treatises. The Athenian educational center of the 9th century functioned as a semi-independent corporation, where the main requirement for an applicant was a free command of the texts of Aristotle, Plato and the Church Fathers, rather than the presentation of proof of social status. After 3 years of study and gaining a reputation in dialectics and exegesis, Johannes Anglicus arrived in Rome. Thanks to a written recommendation from diplomatic agents of the Frankish court, the applicant obtained the initial position of scriptor in the papal chancery. The daily life of a curial official was characterized by strict isolation. The notaries resided in closed cells at the Lateran Palace, Palatium Lateranense, ate at a common table, and were subject to the jurisdiction of the curial court alone. The concealment of physiological characteristics was ensured by the wearing of loose, long liturgical garments, dalmatics, chasubles, and albs, as well as the rare practice of physical examinations, which in the 9th century were used only in cases of suspected simony or leprosy. Rapid career advancement from scriptor to cardinalis diaconus was made possible by the implementation of efficient accounting and codification schemes for the financial receipts from the English tax, the Peter's pence, denarius sancti Petri. The institutional system of information transfer within the chancery relied on strictly regulated bureaucratic channels. As a cardinal deacon, Johannes Anglicus was responsible for drafting papal encyclicals, literae encyclicae, maintaining judicial records, and distributing subsidies for Roman shelters and hospices. The oath taken upon entry into the rank of cardinal included a pledge of absolute loyalty to the pontiff and the preservation of the secrecy of the curia's closed sessions under threat of anathema and immediate defrocking. Official correspondence was conducted using special encrypted abbreviations based on a combination of Tironian notes and Greek cryptography, known only to a limited circle of 4 people in the immediate entourage of Pope Leo IV. The logistics of meetings for curial officials were strictly tied to the canonical hours of prayer: matins, terce, sext, and none. Key administrative decisions were made in the consistorium hall of the Lateran Palace, where access by outsiders was completely blocked by papal guards from among Frankish and Swabian mercenaries. His constant presence at the bedside of Pope Leo IV during his severe illness in 854 and 855 allowed Johannes Anglicus to consolidate control over the curia's financial flows, including the distribution of land benefices in central Italy. Due to the lack of continuous oversight of the use of the papal lead seal, bulla plumea, a significant portion of current decrees were signed and approved without the direct personal involvement of the elderly pontiff himself. After the demise of Pope Leo IV on July 17, 855, amidst an acute conflict between the pro-imperial faction of Anastasius the librarian and the local Roman clergy, the conclave of cardinals settled on Johannes Anglicus as a compromise and neutral technocrat, not belonging to the rival aristocratic clans. His election to the papal throne under the name John VIII, denoted in later 13th century lists also as John VII or John VIII, required a complete restructuring of the pontiff's personal security and daily routine. According to the reports of inquisitorial reviews from the 13th century, the governance of the Vatican during this pontificate lasted 2 years, 5 months, and 4 days. The Pope's administrative activities focused on reforming the land registry of church holdings in the Campania region, as well as completing the fortification of the walls around the Vatican quarter of the Leonine city, Civitas Leonina, for protection against raids by Saracen pirates. However, a critical failure in the system of individual disguise occurred due to physiological factors, which became impossible to conceal under the conditions of medieval daily life. On October 12, 857, or 855 according to alternative chronicles, during a solemn procession on the feast of the Rogationes, the Greater Litanies, the papal procession moved along the traditional ceremonial route, the Via Papalis, from the St. Peter's Basilica to the Lateran Basilica. The route passed through a narrow alley between the Caelian Hill and the Colosseum, known as the Vicus Sceleratus. In conditions of extreme crowd density, high air temperature, and prolonged pedestrian movement, the pontiff began sudden labor. The lack of conditions for isolation and the public nature of the event made it impossible to conceal the biological sex of the head of the church. In the ensuing confusion, representatives of the Roman crowd and the present clergy carried out the physical suppression of the pontiff and the newborn child directly at the scene. The deprivation of life was carried out by virtue of qualifying the incident as the gravest sacrilege and defilement of the Holy See. The body was buried without ceremony in the same place, without any tomb inscriptions, and the alley itself was immediately removed from all liturgical routes of the Roman Church. A detailed critical audit of the preserved primary sources reveals large-scale discrepancies between 9th century documents and 13th century narrative chronicles. In the authentic records of the papal chronicle Liber Pontificalis, edited by the contemporary of the events Anastasius Bibliothecarius, the death of Pope Leo IV on July 17, 855, is followed by the enthronement of Pope Benedict III on September 29, 855. The chronological interval of 2 months and 12 days between the death of Leo IV and the confirmation of Benedict III is entirely occupied by the events of the attempted forceful seizure of the throne by anti-Pope Anastasius, supported by the Frankish imperial legates Gulduin and Eberhard. Not one of the surviving original documents from the 9th and 10th centuries, including the diplomatic correspondence of Archbishop Hincmar of Reims, the chronicles of Abbot Regino of Prüm, and the official acts of the local councils in Tours and Soissons, contains a single mention of the existence of a female pontiff. This narrative first appears in Dominican codices only in the mid-13th century. The first written record is contained in the Chronicon Universale Metense by the Dominican Jean de Mailly, compiled around 1250, where the pontiff appears without a specified name. Around 1260, the Inquisitor Etienne de Bourbon, in his treatise Tractatus de diversis materias praedicabilibus, supplements the narrative with details about the labor during movement along the Via Papalis. The most developed form of the story appeared in 1277 in the Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum by Martinus Polonus, Martin of Opava, where precise chronological parameters were first recorded, a pontificate of 2 years, 5 months, and 4 days between Leo IV and Benedict III, as well as an indication of the candidate's origin from Mainz. A deep analysis of the institutional reasons for the emergence of this narrative in the 13th century points to a direct connection with the political situation and systemic conflicts within the Roman Catholic Church. The period from 1240 to 1270 was characterized by an extreme escalation of the struggle between the Holy See and Emperor Frederick II of Hohenstaufen and his heirs. Ghibelline propagandists and radically minded monks from the mendicant orders who sought to reform the papal curia actively used the story of the Popus as a tool of information warfare to discredit the dogma of papal continuity and infallibility. The Dominican order, which oversaw the institution of the Inquisition, used this precedent as an argument to justify the need for establishing total oversight over the papal chancery and introducing strict procedures for biographical audits of all candidates for episcopal sees. Furthermore, a paleographic study of the 1,277 manuscripts of Martinus Polonus reveals signs of interpolation and textual falsification. In many surviving copies from the 13th and 14th centuries, the fragment about Johannes Anglicus is inscribed in small handwriting in the margins or pasted over the original text on separate strips of parchment, as confirmed by research in the Vatican archives in the 19th and 20th centuries. The testimonies of medieval chroniclers demonstrate a direct contradiction. Jean de Mailly dates the events to 1099 after the pontificate of Urban II, while Martinus Polonus places them in 855. Such discrepancies indicate a consistent construction of a political myth within the curial opposition during the prolonged conclave in Viterbo in 1268 to 1271, which lasted 2 years and 9 months. A significant material argument put forward by supporters of the historicity of this event was the ritual of verifying the sex of the newly elected pontiff using the porphyry chair, the cella stercoraria. In late medieval popular literature, a persistent notion formed that every pope, before his coronation, was obliged to sit on a special throne with a hole in the seat, after which a junior cardinal deacon would perform a visual and tactile inspection to confirm his male sex. However, scientific archaeological and liturgical analysis completely refutes this hypothesis. 2 porphyry chairs, previously located in the Lateran Basilica, are preserved in the collections of the Vatican museums and the Paris Louvre. In reality, these artifacts are ancient Roman curule chairs, or bidets, from 2nd century AD ancient Roman baths, carved from red Egyptian porphyry. They were integrated into the papal enthronement rite in the 11th century under Pope Gregory VII, not for physiological verification, but as a symbolic depiction of the pontiff's profound humility. The liturgical formula of enthronement was accompanied by the singing of Psalm 112, De stercore erigens pauperem, he raises the poor from the dust. The very name, cella stercoraria, literally translates as dung chair, emphasizing the contrast between the human insignificance of the chosen one and the greatness of the papal office. The erroneous interpretation of the structural hole in the ancient Roman porphyry by pilgrims and travelers of the 14th century gave rise to the legend of the sex verification, which is entirely absent from the official Vatican ceremonial guides, the Ordines Romani, of the 9th to 15th centuries. An additional aspect of the textual analysis concerns the evolution of the lists of papal catalogues in the scriptoria of the 14th and 15th centuries. When copying the chronicles of Martinus Polonus in the monasteries of the Holy Roman Empire, scribes regularly encountered a chronological shift in the numbering of popes named John. The presence of a numbering gap between John XIV, 983 to 984, and John XIX, 1024 to 1032, created formal lacunae in the lists of pontiffs. Due to the lack of a unified archival base in the 14th century, medieval erudites perceived these numbering errors as proof of the deliberate removal of information about the popes from the Vatican registers. Furthermore, in 1415 at the Council of Constance, the Czech reformer Jan Hus actively cited the precedent of Johannes Anglicus as proof that the visible church could err at the highest hierarchical level. It is noteworthy that not one of the 300 participants of the Council of Constance, including the highest cardinals, theologians, and canonists of the Vatican, disputed the historicity of the fact of the papacy's reign. This indicates that by the beginning of the 15th century, thanks to the wide dissemination of Martinus Polonus's codices, the legend had already fully entered the official historical narrative of the Catholic world, and was perceived as an unconditional legal precedent. A paleographic audit of 14th-century codices from the libraries of Siena and Avignon shows that the text about Pope Joan circulated via 3 independent manuscript stemmata. In the first group of copies, the candidate appears under the name Agnes of Mainz, in the second group as Gilberta of England, and in the third group under the institutionalized pseudonym Johannes Anglicus. The financial ledgers of the Avignon papacy for the years 1316 to 1378 contain records of the withdrawal from circulation of 8 copies of the Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum, in which the mention of a female pontificate contained critical attacks against apostolic succession. Inspection protocols of the inquisitors Thomas de Caccini and Bernard Guy for the year 1323 recorded the destruction of 5 copies of the Chronicles in the scriptoria of Toulouse and Florence. These facts confirm that Vatican administrators of the 14th century conducted targeted work to sterilize historical narratives that threatened the canonical legitimacy of the Curia. The documentary epilogue of this historical investigation summarizes the large-scale institutional and legal transformations caused by the dissemination of Martin of Opava's manuscripts. The revision of papal archives and property inspections carried out between 1276 to 1294 under Popes Boniface VIII and Nicholas IV led to the seizure and destruction of 14 dubious codices and the tightening of rules for storing acts of the Vatican archive. The official route of papal processions, the Via Papalis, was legislatively altered. In the liturgical Ordo of 1274, the Cardinal Master of Ceremonies was instructed, under threat of a fine of 100 gold florins, to direct the procession to bypass the alley Vicus Sceleratus near the Church of St. Clement, using the parallel street Via Merulana instead. The decisions of the Council of Lyon in 1274, under Pope Gregory X, radically changed the legal system of papal elections. Henceforth, cardinals were to be enclosed in an isolated conclave room without the right to communicate with the outside world, and the biographical and legal documents of candidates were subjected to thorough verification by notaries from 3 independent dioceses. The influence of this precedent on canon law was expressed in the codification of requirements for ordination in commentaries on the Decretum Gratiani, and the introduction of mandatory checks on the legitimacy of origin for all candidates to curial offices. Thus, although the story of Pope Joan is the result of 13th-century falsification and complex textual evolution, it served as a catalyst for the formation of the modern system of secret archival accounting, notarial audit, and liturgical protocol of the Holy See.